Welcome to the Biz Doctor Podcast, my love letter to business owners the world over. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, award-winning business consultant and advisor fondly nicknamed the Biz Doctor by my clients. I help business owners who are burning the candle at both ends diagnose what is actually keeping them buried in the day-to-day busy work, and then formulate a treatment plan to adjust their business and team to fit them, so they can take a breath and a vacation and have more fun making a bigger impact than ever. So grab your favorite beverage and your earbuds, and let's dive into our latest episode. I sometimes feel like being a CEO of a company is similar to being president. It comes with a lot of power and influence, but there isn't a school to teach you how to be either of those. Even MBAs, leadership courses, etc., struggle to really articulate and train you on what a CEO is or how to be an effective one. That is, until now. If you've ever wondered what the heck makes a CEO great or what separates the truly remarkable ones from the ones that fail, then you're going to love what is in store for you in today's episode as we dive into the CEO operating system. Welcome back to the Biz Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, and I'm joined in the studio with Joel Trammell, who coined that very term and has put together a remarkable framework and curriculum to help develop effective CEOs. Let me introduce you to Joel so you can see why I'm so excited to have him on the show and dig into this often misunderstood role of CEO. Joel Trammell is a seasoned entrepreneur and expert in executive leadership with over 3 decades of experience in founding and managing companies. He's been CEO of high-growth startups as well as public companies and successfully built and sold 2 businesses for over 9 figures. He spends most of his time training CEOs and their executive teams on how to create an operating system for their company at scale. Now, I happen to know that that is a very modest introduction. Your breadth of knowledge running, building, and exiting businesses is extensive, which is one of the many reasons I'm so excited to have you on the show, so we can really dig into this fascinating topic. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Great to be with you, Lauren.
Thanks. I've really been looking forward to this. So for those listening, I know I shared a brief look into how you got here, but I'd love for you to walk us through more about how you work with CEOs, your journey, and specifically what gets you so passionate about this work.
Well, I started my career teaching at the U.S. Navy's Nuclear Power School. And the plan was I was going to teach, see if I liked teaching, go get a master's and then a PhD and be a university professor, because that's what my father was. And I was supposed to follow in his footsteps, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I started taking a couple of graduate math courses and realized I had no interest in engineering anymore. I had met a couple of people, which we would now call entrepreneurs, but we didn't really use that word in those days, small business people when I was in high school. And that kind of had fascinated me, this idea that you could run your own show, that you could use your wits to make money and didn't have to depend on other people was interesting. And so in my last year in the Navy, I decided to start a business and see what I could learn about running a business. And that's where the journey started. And then I quickly became unqualified to do anything else. So you better figure out a way to make it work, right? And
right.
I was just always fascinated with the problem of how do you run an organization, particularly at large scale, because my experience at Nuclear Power School, they recruited a lot of brilliant engineers to teach at the school. And I thought if you had a lot of smart people together, running the organization should be easy and it should run very efficiently and effectively. And I found out that no, having a bunch of smart people there wasn't sufficient to make the organization work. So my journey really started, I really founded companies because I wanted to figure out how to run them well. I'm not the classic entrepreneur who had this burning idea that I just had to get to market or something. It was really all about learning how to run the organization.
I love that. I think it's so interesting hearing entrepreneur stories because everybody's got a different reason that they got into it. And I think yours is so interesting. So let's start with the doozy question for you. What do you think the number one role of a CEO is?
The number one role of the CEO is to maximize the productivity of the organization and hopefully deliver predictable performance.
Predictable performance. Let's talk a little bit more about that because I feel like a lot of CEOs think there's a lot more doing, but from your perspective, this predictable performance is a lot more strategic. So tell me more about this.
Yeah, so I think, everybody would understand that the CEO is ultimately responsible for the performance of the business. But if one quarter you're a million up and the next quarter you're a million down, and you don't know any of those things are going to happen, it's very hard to be successful and provide a sustainable, growing organization. And so, this idea of predictability is key because it focuses the CEO, the leader, on the future. And I'll often use the analogy of a bus driver. If you're driving the bus, you don't spend a lot of time normally looking in the rearview mirror. Your job is to look down the road, see where the next turn is, avoid any potholes in the road. And so your time scale, your focus is mostly out into the future. And it should be the same thing for the CEO, but I find many CEOs aren't focused on the future. They walk into the office every day and they have to play whack-a-mole on the problems that happened yesterday and today. And you're just not going to build a great organization if that's the way you do the job.
Yeah, that shift from being reactive to proactive is key. So, what do you say to people who think it's hard to predict the future of a business because there's so much outside of your control?
And no question, it is absolutely really hard to predict the future. But just like when you start on a road trip, you have a destination in mind and you make a plan as to how you're going to get to that destination. Things may change along the way. You may run into weather. You may run into your car breaking down along the way, but that doesn't mean you don't have a rational plan of how to get to where you want to go. A lot of businesses have only vague aspirations about where they want to go. They don't have a clear plan that is understandable to everyone in the organization. And then they're shocked when they don't get to where they want to go, when most of the organization didn't even know where the journey was taking them.
So, in your opinion, what components does a plan have to be something that the company can follow through to?
Yeah, so let me reverse the question a little bit and start with the concept of, as CEO, are you changing the behavior of any of the individual contributors in your organization? Because that's what's necessary for the plan. If the plan does not change anybody's behavior, then you haven't done anything as CEO. I mean, I once had a call with a CEO of a public company who had been at the company for a whole year, and he was asking me about his strategy and some presentations he had given, and those strategy presentations were great. But I asked him, how have you changed the behavior of any of the people that are actually doing all the work, that are servicing the customer, meeting with the customer, selling the customer, marketing the customer? And he couldn't give me any answer. And that's the challenge. If you have a plan, but it provides no guidance for an individual employee to actually make different decisions than they would normally, then it really hadn't provided any value.
So this behavior change sounds like it's not that you're changing who they innately are, you're changing how they operate within the role. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they don't know where we're going, they're going to probably make some decisions differently than the way I would have made them if I was in their position with the same information I have as CEO. And that's really kind of the fundamental thing you're doing as you grow an organization. When you're small, the CEO can make all the decisions. If you've got 5 people, the CEO knows what everybody's doing. They know everything that's going on. They make all the decisions. At some point, 20, 40, 50, 100 people, it becomes impossible for the CEO to know everything that's going on. And so then you reverse. Instead of the CEO making the decisions, the CEO needs to pass down the information necessary for the people at the individual or lower level management levels to make the right decision, the same decision the CEO would make if they had access to all the information that person does in that role.
Now, for me and my clients, a lot of my clients are business owners that became the CEO, and probably what you just said triggered them because they want to know what's going on. They want to be involved. So what advice do you have for a business owner turned CEO about letting go and allowing decisions to be made with your team?
Well, it's the only way that scales. And so, yes, if you want to 10 years from now have a 10-person business that runs the same as your business does today, that's fine. That's a personal decision you make. If you have aspirations, though, of selling the business for a multi-million-dollar amount, or transitioning the business and it being a business that has a long lifespan, I believe you have to grow and scale that business. And so to do that, you can't do everything as CEO. You can't make every decision. And yes, I know it gives some people comfort to make all those decisions and be involved in everything. And I think that's particularly because they don't know what they should be doing as CEO. And so when you don't know what you should be doing and you get stressed in the business, you go back to what you know. And if they were a plumber and have a plumbing business, they go back to doing plumbing or selling plumbing or whatever, because that's what they know how to do. And it's a lot of the reason I spend my time teaching the course and writing and talking about and doing podcasts about this concept, is because it's not obvious what the CEO does externally from just looking in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've heard you talk about an expert versus a generalist. You want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, most people get to the CEO position because they've had expertise in some particular area. Again, maybe they started out as a plumber and became a great plumber, and that's allowed them to get a lot of business, and suddenly they hired some of their friends, and now they're CEO. They didn't get to be CEO because they were a great CEO. They got to be CEO because they were a great plumber. And it can be the same thing. A lot of people progress in a functional area of the business, sales or marketing or whatever. And in those areas of the business, what you're rewarded with is your expert knowledge, right? If you're the EVP of worldwide sales for a company, you're expected to be the sales expert in the company. And then by nature of your position, every problem that comes to your desk is a sales problem. And so while you may not know the exact answer, you have the most experience, you've seen the most. And so what do? You say, give me all the data on the problem. Let me use the brilliant pattern matching characteristics of the human brain to compare it to past situations, and I'll make a decision as an expert. But if I take that same EVP of sales and move them into a CEO position, the problem is 9 out of the 10 decisions that are going to come to their desk have nothing to do with sales. Somebody's going to walk in and say, we're having trouble with this lease in Poughkeepsie. and to become an expert on leases in Poughkeepsie would take you the same 20 years that it took you to be an expert in sales. But if you don't realize that, you want to dig in and you say, well, give me all the data on leasing in Poughkeepsie, whatever, and you spend hours. But then the problem is there's somebody else standing outside your office waiting for you to get through with the lease in Poughkeepsie because they got an HR problem in Chicago that they want you to deal with, right? And so the nature in which you make decisions has to switch from you being the expert to learning how to leverage expertise in the functional areas and coordinate those activities across multiple functional areas of your business.
Which sounds like for those that have built successful businesses that are very smart, there's a little bit of an ego death and a humility that comes from not jumping in to solve all the problems, but rather finding the right people to solve the problems.
That's right. You have to find the right people, and you use your expertise. I mean, if you have expertise in sales, you ought to be able to identify who good salespeople are, and you really shouldn't have to spend a lot of time managing them because you should know enough about that part of the business to be able to determine whether they're doing a good job. And you probably need to spend your time actually in the other areas where you don't know as much to learn more about those areas of the business. But it's all around trying to find great people and learning how to manage those executives. And that's just a skill most people don't get a chance to manage executives unless they're in the CEO role. And managing experts is a challenge.
This wasn't a question that I initially had for you, but it just popped in my mind. With business owners, it seems like their natural trajectory is from operator to owner to CEO. But how would you suggest someone self-evaluate to say, yes, I will be an effective CEO, or this is the role that I should take, versus finding an external person to be the CEO of their business?
Yeah, so I think it's where you get your energy, right? I was just talking to a business owner today, and he was talking about he gets his energy from dealing with customers, selling to the customer, servicing the customer. And I'm like, your best answer then is not to be CEO, because while certainly CEOs care about customers and need to be conversing with customers, that can only be a small part of their time. And they've got to spend their time on HR issues and finance issues and marketing issues and other things. And so, if that doesn't give you energy, if you like specializing in a particular area of the business, that's not rewarded in the CEO job. And so you may want to look elsewhere. If you are more interested, I always find curiosity is kind of an interesting piece. Are you curious about all the aspects of the business? And that's more likely to make you a good CEO. It was kind of I see a lot of CEOs that almost, it's like they have a favored child, right? and they're always with the CFO, or they're always with the sales guy, or they're always, and my view was, no, I've got this whole family, and I got to love all of them the same, and I've got to be interested in all of them the same if I'm going to be an effective CEO. You saw my analogy in the class of 6 wheels on a bus, and each functional area has got to turn at the same speed. So I'm constantly trying to figure out which one's slowing me down. Is it sales slowing me down? Is it marketing slowing me down? I'm speeding that one up. But then if that gets going well, then there's another one that's the slow one. And so it's this idea of constantly context switching. If you don't enjoy that activity, it's going to be tough to be an effective CEO.
Very well said. I love that answer. So what do you think the biggest blind spot most CEOs have that is preventing them from becoming more effective?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier, ego. Our ego gets tied up in our position and in what we've done. And it gets very hard to let loose and give other people the opportunity to fail. Because yes, nobody's going to do it as well as you did it, but you spent 10 years doing it, and then to expect somebody you hire off the street to come in and do the whatever part of the job as well as you did it after 10 years is unrealistic expectation, and there's a great fear of failure that CEOs have. I mean, we all know if you look at the Fortune 500 from 30 years ago, about half those businesses aren't on the Fortune 500 anymore. Some CEO messed it up. So that's the challenge. And when a CEO fails, it's very public, right? I mean, when the business fails, we know who to blame, right? It's not like you're the, sales manager or something, and you can say, oh, well, the problem was, the product guys weren't delivering a good product, and so I had to leave the company, whatever. People don't know what happens underneath, but they know when the CEO, when the business fails, that ultimately that was the CEO's fault.
What do you think the difference is between ego and confidence?
Yeah. It's really self-awareness, right? Proper confidence is knowing what you're good at, and also, of course, knowing what you're bad at. Ego is thinking I have to be great at everything, or my whole success, my ego is tied up in how successful this business is, not recognizing that we're all human and we have some strengths and we have some weaknesses as well. And sometimes we get unlucky, sometimes we get lucky, and being able to be comfortable in your own skin with that.
So you've exited 2 businesses, and it's an interesting phenomena when people exit. Either they go on and they get bored and they start another business, or they're like, retirement. What is retirement? So what advice do you have for somebody who's sitting in the CEO, business owner seat, thinking about exiting, to have not just a financially successful exit, but like a personable exit in terms of like their identity and who they are outside of this business that they've sold and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, do you know yourself? I remember a conversation I had when I was a teenager. My dad was approaching retirement, and he was really looking forward to retirement. He wanted to go fishing all the time, and he did. He retired, and he went fishing a lot and seemed to be perfectly happy with that. And I remember even thinking at that time, boy, that seems boring. I love fishing, but I got to have some reason to wake up in the morning. I got to feel like I'm making a difference in the world. And I don't think I'll ever retire. And that thought has stayed with me, for 40 years since, that, I'm not interested in retiring, but some people are. And so if you don't know that about yourself, what the real goal is, when I visit with business owners, that's typically my first question. What's the real goal here? What are we really trying to do? What is success? What are you going to be happy with? And a lot of people don't really know themselves very well. And they think maybe if I sell this business for a big number, that'll make me feel good. Great. But if 6 months from now, you're going to be waking up every morning and wondering what's for lunch, I can tell you that's no fun if that's not your personality.
Yes. Great answer. So you have this amazing framework that I have been fortunate enough to have learned about and witnessed called the CEO operating system, which we could talk about for hours. I mean, it's a 3-day training, so we don't have that time. But why don't you give me and our listeners just 2 or 3 nuggets to whet their appetites to understand a little bit more about what the CEO operating system actually is?
Yeah, so I think it starts with a couple of just fundamental concepts. We all have to create mental models to simplify the world. And what is the mental model you're operating your business with? And my experience is most people, and me included when I started in business, had a pretty simple mental model that said, hey, I've got this product or service. I need to sell that product or service, and I need to do that without running out of money. And that is a perfectly valid mental model that works quite well in the early stages of a business, in the startup stages of a business, until you get to real product market fit. That's fine. You don't need to change it. But once you get to sustainability, a business where you're not worried, week to week about cash flow, where you can make payroll and you're growing the business, that mental model needs to change. So we introduce a slightly more complex mental model that I think is much more effective. And because it's a different mental model, it has implications throughout how you organize the business, how you set goals in the business. It really has significant implications. And I don't see a lot of people talking about that, how that mental model needs to switch, or to even talking about what is your mental model for a business. So that's one of the concepts that we explore extensively. I think the second is people. As you grow the organization, your contributions as CEO become less and less, obviously, and more it's about how well you can get people to perform. And people are different than you. You can't hire 100 people who are all identical to you and respond to the exact same inputs and incentives that you do. And so beginning to build a mental model and thought around how organizations work most effectively is really important. And none of us, at least I didn't take any class on how to get people to perform in college. That was something I had to learn over 30 years. And so that's a key component that most CEOs are missing. They don't understand how to get the best out of all the different personality types and behaviors you're going to see in the workplace. So those are 2 of the fundamental concepts. As you know, we talk about a lot of other things as well, but I think those are 2 that often are aha moments for CEOs in our course.
Mm-hmm. And you also talk about the difference between coaching, managing, and leading.
Yes.
Can you give them a little teaser of that? Because
sure.
that broke my brain.
Okay. Yeah. So again, it's sort of a mental model of what are the tools? What can you do as a CEO? Well, you can fire people. Okay, great. But as we all know that have been in the role, that always the start of solving a problem. It's not the solution to a problem. You got to find somebody to do the job. And so I really, when I was putting the course together, gave a lot of thought. What can you do? What activities? Well, you get to make decisions. As CEO, you get to make a whole bunch of decisions, and I call that the management tool. And making good decisions is important, and we talk about how you should think about making those decisions. But I find a lot of CEOs think that's the only tool they have, that they just get to make decisions, and then whatever else happens is somebody else's problem. Well, unfortunately, you're responsible for everything, so you've got to understand the 2 other tools you have. One of those is leadership, which is your ability to get people to do what you want them to do and make them think it's their idea.
That's key.
As Eisenhower said, because that's the only way you get the level of engagement you need to be successful. And so there's an art to leadership, and we certainly talk about that. And then there's a coaching component as well that I think is hugely valuable. You have a lot of knowledge and experience, but also you can be an independent observer of the person's performance. This is the reason every professional athlete has a coach. No one knows how to play tennis better than Rafael Nadal. He's had more success than any player on clay at Roland Garros. Why would he have a coach? Because people confuse coaching with training. The coach is not a technical expert and knows more about hitting a ball than Rafael Nadal, but he can sit there and observe that, under stress, Rafael, you always pass down the line, and your opponent's figured that out. But Rafael won't see that during the match because he's so emotionally engaged in the activity. And so you have to be doing the same thing for your employees. You have to be observing their behavior when they're in the middle of the stressful situation and figuring out how they can improve that and improve their productivity in the organization. And so those are your three tools, really: management, leadership, and coaching. And it depends on what's going wrong as to which one you need to apply. But I often see CEOs who think just making a decision, telling people what to do is the only tool they have. And I can promise you that's not going to be very successful.
Oh, I love hearing you explain that, because when you explained it the first time, it broke my brain. So hopefully it broke the brains of those who are listening as well. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, how do I connect with Joel? So before I get to my last two questions, and trust me, you guys are going to want to stick around and hear them, why don't you share how our listeners can connect with you further or learn about the CEO operating system?
Right. Well, our website is CEOSYS, S-Y-S, CEOSYS.co. And I'm, of course, available on LinkedIn, and we publish a regular newsletter called Managing the Future that you might want to subscribe to hear a lot of these concepts on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. And also, you have a book?
I have a couple of books. Chief Executive Operating System is the most recent, and that really explains a lot of the material that we cover in the course. I also have a book called The Manager's Playbook. A lot of times when we engage with CEOs, they're like, oh, this is great, but now you need to educate my whole team. And so we do that as well in some cases. And then the first book I wrote was called The CEO Tightrope, which was really my attempt to start talking and start a conversation about a systematic way to think about the CEO job. Because I was surprised when I started that book. I thought Harvard and Stanford would have their models for how to be a CEO. And the interesting thing when I dug into it is, no, they don't even have a model. They don't even talk about what it's like to be CEO of a modern organization. They talk about very narrow, specific management or leadership issues, which may be helpful, but they don't have a systematic view of it. And it's really hard to train somebody in an area if you don't have a systematic view of how to do the job.
Very well said. All right. So I know we've covered a lot. Are there any last nuggets or pieces of advice or perspective that you want to share with our listeners before we wrap up? Or said slightly differently, what don't people ask you that you wish they would?
Well, one thing that I think a lot of CEOs struggle with is feeling like they don't know what to do. They're not competent. They're not ready for the job. And I tell everybody, if you made me CEO of your company tomorrow, I'm not qualified for that job tomorrow. Because so much of the CEO job depends on understanding the employees and the customers and the shareholders and balancing these interests and stuff. No one's qualified for the CEO job. But if you've been doing it for a while, I can promise you, you are the best qualified person for the job. Quit that thinking and figure out how to get better. Quit worrying about, is there somebody out there that has all the answers? No, there's not somebody that knows the right decision in your business at this point in time for every question you have. There are people, and I hope I'm one of them, that can ask you the right questions to figure out what the answers are. But don't worry, no one's really qualified for the job, and don't worry about that, and just get on with trying to be better at it.
Oh, that was a great nugget. And hopefully everybody listening kind of just exhaled, because I know there's, we talk about imposter syndrome, or like, what the heck are we doing? And there's a really great book, which you and I talked about, called by Annie Duke, called
Thinking in Bets.
Thinking in Bets. Yes, I had a little brain fart there. And she talks about resulting. And I think that so much of the CEO role is making a decision, the best decision in the moment, and our outcomes are sometimes what we want and sometimes not, but learning from them, which I do with postmortems. Those are my favorite things to do, is say like, well, it happened. Why did it happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? All right. Last question that I ask all my guests. What is a book that you think every entrepreneur or business owner should read and why?
Yeah, so probably the most formative book for me was a book called First Break All the Rules, What Great Managers Do Differently by Marcus Buckingham. Book's probably 25 years old at this point or something. It was based on a bunch of research Gallup had done, but it was the first book that took an analytical approach to the human side of running a business that really resonated with the engineer in me, but also the people side of the equation. It answered a lot of questions about how to get people to perform at their maximum level. And so that was really a formative book for me, because like many people who start businesses, I was very technically oriented at that time. And that really opened my eyes to the people side of the equation.
I love Marcus. I've watched many of his talks, and it's fascinating how he uses the data to really dig into what makes people tick. So I will be adding that to my Amazon cart right after we get off the show. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it. And I feel like this episode was chock full of really great nuggets. And so I can't wait to have people listen to it and maybe even have you back on to dive deeper.
Sure. Happy to be on.
Awesome. Okay. Well, sadly, that is it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening in. If anything we shared sparked something in you, we'd love for you to rate and review our show and share this episode with your friends or other business owners. I'd also so enjoy hearing from you. So let's connect. Tag or DM me on Instagram at It's Lauren Goldstein or LinkedIn or wherever you hang out on the interwebs. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe so you're the first to get notified when our next episode is live and ready for your ears. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Biz Doctor podcast. Now, I like to say that friends don't let friends WebMD your business. So if you're wondering what your next steps could be, here are some options for you. No matter what, head to the show notes or to my website, goldenkeypartnership.com, for some impactful resources to support you getting out from under your business. That's also where you'll find the links to learn more about our services and how we support business owners, just like you, who are ready to make the successful jump from business operator in the trenches to visionary business owner with more freedom and flexibility. All of that info is on our website, so pop on over to learn more or get in touch. goldenkeypartnership.com. Finally, if you love the Biz Doctor podcast, I'd be so grateful if you would share it with your friends and network and give us a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast.
This is Story Studio Network.